You ever hear a steel bridge scream in the middle of the night? Because I have. And once you hear it, you don't forget it. The sound rolled through the canyon at 2:13 in the morning while cold rain hammered the roof of my cabin hard enough to shake the windows. I was halfway through a stale turkey sandwich and trying not to fall asleep in my recliner when the old bridge let out this deep metallic groan that rattled straight through the floorboards. At first I thought it was thunder bouncing off the mountains. Then I saw headlights. 3 sets, maybe 4. White beams cutting through the rain where nobody should have been driving at that hour. I pulled my jacket on and stepped outside into 40-degree mountain air that smelled like wet pine, diesel exhaust, and overheated brakes. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked toward the ridge overlooking the bridge. That's when I saw the concrete trucks. Huge bastards. Fully loaded. Crawling across my bridge one after another like they owned the place. Water dripped off the steel support cables while the entire structure groaned under the weight. I just stood there for a second in the rain trying to process what I was looking at. Because nobody used that bridge except me. Nobody was supposed to. Not legally anyway. But down below, through the fog and rain, I could already see workers setting orange cones and temporary floodlights on the other side near Blackstone Ridge. The HOA development. $1 million homes tucked into the mountains about 2 miles east of my land. The kind of neighborhood where every mailbox matched, and people complained online if somebody parked a pickup truck in the wrong driveway for more than 6 hours. And standing right in the middle of it all under a giant black umbrella was Victoria Sterling. Even from that distance I recognized the bright fuchsia blazer immediately. Hard to miss in the middle of a storm. She stood there pointing toward my bridge while contractors nodded around her like nervous employees around a CEO. I remember laughing. Not because it was funny. More because my brain genuinely didn't know what else to do at that moment. 20 years building bridges across Colorado, and somehow I still ended up living next to people dumb enough to run loaded concrete trucks across a private steel crossing built in 1978. The rain soaked through my flannel almost instantly while I climbed down toward the bridge entrance. By the time I reached the gate, my jeans were covered in mud halfway to my knees, and my lower back already hurt from slipping on loose gravel. Getting older's a funny thing. You still feel 30 in your head right up until cold weather reminds you otherwise. One of the contractors spotted me first. Young guy. Couldn't have been older than 25. Reflective rain jacket. Nervous eyes. "Sir, you can't be down here right now," he yelled over the sound of the trucks. I looked past him toward Victoria. She lowered the umbrella slowly and gave me this tight little smile, like we were neighbors discussing lawn care, instead of trespassing on private infrastructure at 2 in the morning. "Mr. Walker," she called out. "We were going to contact you Monday." I stared at another truck rumbling onto the bridge and felt the steel vibrate under my boots. That old familiar engineer instinct hit me immediately. Too much load. Too much repetition. Too much water on the deck plates. My stomach tightened. "You're running 80,000-pound mixers across a bridge you never inspected?" I asked. Victoria adjusted the folder under her arm like the weather itself annoyed her personally. "The community approved emergency access improvements yesterday evening." Community. That word again. HOA people always say community right before they try taking something that doesn't belong to them. The bridge groaned louder this time. Deep. Sharp. Wrong. And for the first time all night, Victoria's smile disappeared for just a second. Victoria recovered fast. People like her usually do. 1 second the bridge noise rattled her nerves. Next second that polished smile slid right back into place like nothing happened. Rain tapped against the umbrella while she stepped carefully across the wet steel toward me. Pink heels clicking against the bridge deck loud enough to echo through the canyon. "You are being incredibly dramatic right now," she said. "The county approved temporary access for emergency infrastructure expansion." I looked past her toward the line of trucks idling in the rain. Their diesel engines vibrated through the bridge rails into my palms. "That bridge was rated for logging equipment 40 years ago," I said. "Not nonstop concrete loads in a storm." One of the drivers killed his engine, and suddenly the canyon got quiet enough for me to hear water rushing under the bridge 200 feet below us. Cold mountain runoff swollen from 3 straight days of rain. Victoria tucked a strand of wet blonde hair behind her ear and gave me this look people use when they think money automatically makes them smarter than you. "Mr. Walker, Blackstone Ridge has over 300 residents. Families. School buses. Emergency vehicles. You cannot realistically expect this community to depend on one outdated private crossing forever. There it was. Not a request. Not negotiation. Entitlement wrapped in suburban professionalism. I remember feeling strangely tired more than angry. Maybe because it was after 2 in the morning. Maybe because I had spent the last 6 months trying to stay invisible up here. Truth is, I did not buy 1,400 acres because I hated people. I bought it because after 20 years inspecting bridges across Colorado, I got tired of living around noise that never stopped. Divorce did not help either. Funny how quiet gets addictive once your house stops sounding like an argument every night. My cabin sat on the western ridge above the canyon, surrounded by pine trees and rusted fencing older than me. The previous owner had warned me about the bridge during closing. I still remember him scratching nicotine stains off his coffee mug while snow piled outside the diner window in fair play. Land's beautiful, he told me. Bridge is the headache. At the time I thought he meant maintenance costs. Standing there in freezing rain watching Victoria Sterling hijack my infrastructure at 2 in the morning, I finally understood what he meant. Another truck rolled onto the bridge. The entire structure shuddered under the weight. Not catastrophic. Not yet. But enough to make the old steel complain. My stomach tightened again. I crouched near the railing and ran my flashlight along one of the lower support beams slick with rainwater. Then I saw it. Fresh scrape marks along the outer flange. Long silver scars cutting through decades of rust. Somebody had clipped the beam recently. Hard enough to strip paint clean off the steel. What happened here? I asked. One of the contractors shifted uncomfortably behind me. Victoria answered too quickly. Minor equipment contact. Already documented. Minor. I pressed my thumb against the exposed metal. Still sharp. Still clean. Recent. How many trucks crossed tonight? Silence. Not long. Just long enough. Then the younger contractor cleared his throat. 8. Maybe 9. Victoria shot him a look sharp enough to shut him up immediately. My chest felt tight all of a sudden. Not panic exactly. More like the same feeling you get hearing an airplane engine make a weird noise mid-flight. The realization that something expensive and heavy may already be failing underneath you. I stood up slowly and looked down the line of idling trucks disappearing into the rain. You need to stop crossing immediately, I said. Victoria laughed softly under her umbrella. Actually laughed. Mr. Walker, with all due respect, this bridge affects an entire community now. Community again. Always community when rich people want access to somebody else's property. I rubbed rainwater off my forehead and realized my hands were shaking a little from cold and lack of sleep. Maybe stress too. Hard to tell anymore. Then another sound rolled through the bridge. Not the normal groan this time. Sharper. Metallic. Deep underneath us. One of the truck drivers leaned halfway out his window and frowned. Even Victoria stopped talking. The rain kept falling. Water dripped through the steel, grating into darkness below us. And for the first time since moving to that mountain, I honestly started wondering if the bridge was no longer the only thing about to crack. Nobody moved for maybe 3 full seconds after that sound. Rainwater hissed against the truck engines while the bridge settled back into place beneath us with a long metallic creak that seemed to vibrate straight through my ribs. One of the drivers finally leaned out his window. "You want us backing these things up?" he asked nervously. Before I could answer, Victoria stepped forward and tightened both hands around that black umbrella like she was physically holding onto control. "No," she said sharply. "We are already behind schedule." Schedule. That word bothered me more than it should have. Because bridges do not care about schedules. Steel does not care about HOA deadlines, or investor meetings, or property values. Physics always wins eventually. I looked again at the scrape marks on the support beam. Fresh metal shining silver under my flashlight. My mind kept running calculations automatically whether I wanted it to or not. Load repetition. Rain saturation. Lateral stress. Old weld fatigue. I had spent 2 decades training myself to notice tiny warning signs before something expensive became dangerous. The problem was, once you see those signs, you cannot unsee them. "Everybody off the bridge," I said finally. "Calm this time." Too calm maybe. "Now." Victoria let out this slow, annoyed breath through her nose like I was inconveniencing her personally by caring whether the structure collapsed. "Mr. Walker, we have county authorization." "For access," I said. "Not overload." Another silence. The younger contractor looked between us awkwardly, clearly wishing he had picked literally any other night to work overtime. Rainwater dripped off the brim of his hard hat while he rubbed his jaw nervously. Maybe we should pause till morning, he muttered. Victoria turned toward him so slowly it almost looked rehearsed, and explained to 300 homeowners why construction delays just doubled their assessment fees, she asked. Nobody answered her. Because fear works differently in neighborhoods like Blackstone Ridge. Nobody wants to be the person blamed for property values dropping. Even contractors know that. I suddenly felt exhausted in a way sleep does not fix. My lower back hurt. My hands smelled like rust and rainwater. I had been standing in wet boots for almost an hour listening to rich people gamble with infrastructure they did not understand. Do whatever you want, I finally said. But if that bridge fails inspection later, every company involved tonight is going to wish they had turned around. Victoria smiled again after that. Smaller this time. More careful. Like she had just realized I was not bluffing, but still believed she could push through anyway. Inspection, she repeated. Nobody said anything about an inspection. I stared at her for a second longer than necessary. Truth was, I had not planned one yet. But the second the words left my mouth, I saw something flicker across the contractor's face. Recognition. Concern. Real concern. That told me more than anything else. Somebody there already knew this situation was not clean. I stepped away from the bridge railing and started walking back toward my truck. Gravel shifted under my boots while cold rainwater slid down the back of my neck. Behind me, I heard Victoria call out, "Mr. Walker, we are trying to improve this community, not damage it." I stopped without turning around. "That bridge was never built for your community," I said quietly. Then I kept walking. The drive back to my cabin took less than 3 minutes, but I sat in the truck another 20 after parking. Heater running. Windshield fogged. My old thermos of coffee sitting cold in the cup holder beside unpaid electric bills and a county tax notice I still had not opened. I remember staring at the bridge lights glowing through the trees across the canyon while the rain kept coming down harder. Part of me wanted to call the county immediately. Another part honestly considered doing nothing, just letting them learn the hard way. That thought bothered me more than I expected, because no matter how much Victoria irritated me, there were still families on the other side of that canyon. Kids, school buses, people who probably had no idea what their HOA board was doing at 2 in the morning. I rubbed both hands over my face and glanced toward the old filing cabinet beside the cabin door, the one holding bridge records I had not touched since buying the property. Then the lights on the bridge suddenly went dark all at once. Every single one. And a second later, my phone started vibrating on the passenger seat. The number on my phone screen did not have a caller ID attached to it. Just county services across the top in block letters while rain hammered the truck roof hard enough to drown out everything else. I almost ignored it. Honestly, by that point I was too tired to deal with another bureaucrat pretending this situation was normal. But something about the timing felt wrong. I answered anyway. "Walker." Static crackled for a second before a man cleared his throat. Older voice. Careful voice. "Mr. Walker, this is Daniel Ruiz with Park County Infrastructure Compliance." He sounded exhausted, like I had interrupted the end of a very long shift. In the background I could hear fluorescent buzzing and somebody coughing. "You still awake?" he asked. I laughed quietly at that and looked out through the fogged windshield toward the dark bridge lights across the canyon. Apparently everybody is tonight. Another pause. "Yeah," he muttered. "About that." Something in his tone made me sit up straighter. Not panic exactly. More like caution. The kind engineers develop after years around people hiding expensive mistakes. "You got contractors crossing your bridge right now?" he asked. "Had," I said. Lights just shut off. I heard papers shuffling on his end of the line. "Listen carefully," he said, lowering his voice. "Did you authorize any structural load review for Blackstone Ridge access expansion?" No longer silence this time. I could hear typing. Fast typing. Then Ruiz sighed heavily into the phone. That is what I thought. Rainwater rolled down the side mirrors while my stomach slowly tightened again. "What exactly is going on?" I asked. Ruiz hesitated long enough to make me nervous. "Off the record," he said quietly. "Nobody in my office can find the original bridge certification file." For a second all I could hear was rain hitting metal and the ticking sound my truck made whenever the heater got too hot. "That bridge has been registered for decades," I said. "Private industrial crossing permit. My grandfather filed the original county paperwork himself." "That is the problem," Ruiz replied. "County records only show the easement corridor now. I frowned immediately. What easement corridor? Another pause. I could practically hear the man regretting this conversation in real time. Mr. Walker, somebody recently submitted revised infrastructure mapping connected to Blackstone Ridge development planning. The filing cabinet inside my cabin suddenly felt a lot heavier in my mind. Revised by who? I asked, even though deep down I already knew. Ruiz exhaled slowly through his nose. I cannot officially answer that, which in county office language usually means yes. I leaned back against the seat and rubbed both hands over my face. I had dealt with enough permitting departments over the years to recognize political avoidance when I heard it. Nobody wanted fingerprints on this thing yet. So let me get this straight, I said carefully. Somebody altered infrastructure records involving my bridge without contacting me. I did not say altered. You did not have to. Ruiz went quiet after that. Somewhere far off beyond the canyon, thunder rolled through the mountains low and heavy. The kind that vibrates through windows before the storm actually hits. Look, he finally said, softer now. You should probably review whatever original documentation you have before this gets any messier. Messier? I almost laughed again. My property had turned into a midnight construction site, and somehow county officials were still acting like the main concern was paperwork optics. Why call me? I asked. Honest question. Because, Ruiz said after a long hesitation, I inspected that bridge 15 years ago. That caught me off guard. I straightened in my seat. You did? Back when your grandfather was still alive. Tough old man. I stared out through the rain toward the dark outline of the bridge barely visible between the trees. He used to say the bridge remembered everybody who crossed it. I muttered before I could stop myself. Ruiz chuckled quietly. Real chuckle this time. Tired. Human. Yeah, he said. Sounds like Walter Walker. Then his tone shifted again. Serious now. Mr. Walker, if contractors damage structural members tonight, and there is no valid county certification on file anymore, you may have a bigger problem than trespassing. I felt cold all of a sudden, even inside the truck heater. What kind of problem? The line stayed silent for 2 full seconds. Then Ruiz answered carefully. The kind where nobody is going to agree on who owns the liability anymore. I barely slept after the call with Ruiz. Honestly, I do not think I even tried. By 4:30 in the morning, I was sitting on the cabin floor surrounded by old bridge records while the storm kept rattling the windows hard enough to make the glass hum. The filing cabinet smelled like dust, machine oil, and old paper baked through decades of Colorado summers. Most of the folders still had my grandfather's handwriting across the tabs in faded black marker. Walter Walker never trusted computers. Said paper was harder for politicians to erase. At the time, I used to laugh at him for that. Around sunrise, I stopped laughing. Outside, the rain finally slowed to a cold mist drifting through the pine trees. The canyon looked gray and exhausted under the morning fog. I had not shaved. My shoulders ached from hunching over paperwork all night. And somewhere around dawn, I realized I had been drinking coffee from the same cup long enough for a thin film to form across the top. That is stress for you. You stop noticing gross things because your brain runs out of room. I found the original bridge certification packet buried underneath a stack of old load reports dated 1998. Heavy paper. County seal still intact. Federal Industrial Crossing registration attached to the back. My grandfather's signature sat at the bottom in thick, uneven pen strokes. And right there on page 4 was the line that made my stomach drop. Restricted private access structure. Not approved for municipal or residential through traffic without structural RE evaluation. I read it 3 times just to make sure sleep deprivation was not scrambling my brain. Then I noticed something else. A handwritten note clipped beside the original permit. Not my grandfather's handwriting this time. Mine. Dated 11 years earlier back when I worked state inspections. Western support beam showing early fatigue under repetitive lateral load. I leaned back against the couch cushion and stared at the ceiling for a long moment while wind pushed mist against the cabin windows. Suddenly, every noise from the night before replayed in my head differently. The scraping beam, the groaning steel, the overloaded trucks. Victoria, acting like county approval, somehow overruled physics itself. My phone buzzed again around 7:15. This time it was Victoria. I almost ignored her call too, but curiosity got me. "Morning, Mr. Walker," she said brightly the second I answered. Too brightly. The kind of voice people use when they are already angry but trying to sound reasonable for legal reasons. I walked onto the cabin porch while she talked. The air smelled like wet dirt and pine sap. Across the canyon, I could see Blackstone Ridge waking up. Garage doors opening. SUVs backing into driveways. Nobody over there looked remotely aware that their entire access road situation might already be a legal disaster. I understand there was some confusion last night, Victoria continued. Confusion? I asked. You drove commercial loads across a restricted industrial bridge at 2 in the morning. She ignored that completely. The board would like to invite you to an emergency HOA meeting today. I actually smiled at that. Not because it was funny, because the audacity impressed me a little. I am not in your HOA. This situation affects the community. There was that word again. Community. Always weaponized. I rubbed my forehead and looked down toward the bridge. Even from this distance, I could see fresh tire tracks cutting mud across the entrance road. Did the county tell you the bridge records disappeared? I asked quietly. Silence. Tiny silence. Barely 2 seconds. But enough. I'm not sure what you mean, she replied carefully. That careful tone told me more than the words did. Mr. Walker, nobody is trying to create conflict here. Another lie delivered in a pleasant suburban voice. I heard papers shifting on her end of the line, then a car door shutting. The board simply believes cooperation is in everybody's best interest. I looked at the bridge again while cold morning wind moved through the steel cables. Cooperation. Funny word. Usually means one side already decided what the other side is supposed to sacrifice. Then Victoria said something that made the back of my neck tighten immediately. You should probably come to the meeting before county inspectors get involved. I stopped moving completely after that, because until that moment, nobody except Ruiz even knew I was considering an inspection. I spent the next hour trying to convince myself I was overthinking things. That is the problem with engineers. Once your brain locks onto a structural issue, everything starts looking like a warning sign. I heated leftover chili on the stove and barely touched it. The cabin smelled like wet denim, burnt coffee, and old wood smoke while fog drifted through the canyon outside thick enough to blur the bridge almost completely from view. Every few minutes another SUV crossed anyway. I could hear tires humming across the steel deck, even through the walls. Blackstone Ridge had already started treating the bridge like public property overnight. That bothered me more than I expected. Not legally. Personally. Around 9:30, I finally drove down toward the HOA clubhouse for the emergency meeting. I almost turned around twice on the way there. Not because I was scared exactly. More because I already knew how these people operated. I had dealt with enough county boards and development committees over the years to recognize when a meeting was not actually a meeting. It was theater. The Blackstone Ridge clubhouse sat behind stone entrance walls and perfectly trimmed landscaping still dripping from the storm. Expensive place. Artificially perfect in the way wealthy neighborhoods always are. Even the pine trees looked organized. I parked my old Ford beside a line of polished SUVs and immediately felt every inch of mud still crusted on my boots from the night before. A few residents glanced at me while walking inside. Nobody smiled. One older guy wearing a golf jacket actually looked down at my truck like it had personally offended him. Funny thing about mountain communities. Rich people move there looking for rugged authenticity, right up until actual rugged people show up. Inside, the clubhouse smelled like lemon cleaner and fresh coffee. The kind from catering boxes. Cheap coffee pretending to be expensive. Residents sat around folding tables whispering, while Victoria stood near the front of the room in that same bright fuchsia suit from the night before like she had not slept either. But her makeup was perfect. Hair perfect. Smile controlled again. She spotted me immediately and raised one hand in this fake, welcoming gesture that somehow felt more hostile than yelling would have. Mr. Walker, she said loudly enough for the room to hear. Thank you for finally joining us. Finally, like I had been the problem. I took a seat near the back without answering. Folding chair squealed against the floor loud enough to make several people turn around. Somebody near the coffee station muttered, "That is him," under their breath. Victoria launched straight into a presentation before I even settled completely. Easement maps appeared on a projector screen beside enlarged development plans for a second Blackstone Ridge expansion phase. New homes. New access roads. New property lines. Then I saw it. My bridge highlighted in blue across the map like it already belonged to them. My stomach sank slowly. As many of you know, Victoria announced smoothly, recent county infrastructure reviews have identified the Western Crossing as a vital community access corridor. Community access corridor. Amazing how fast private property becomes public language once developers start smelling money. I raised my hand slightly. You mean my bridge? A few awkward coughs moved through the room. Victoria kept smiling. Legally speaking, the county is still reviewing historical classifications. There it was again. Historical classifications. Careful wording. Lawyer wording. I stared at the map while something cold settled into my chest. They had been planning this longer than I thought. Probably months. Maybe more. One resident near the front turned around toward me. Middle-aged woman. Nervous expression. Wait, she asked carefully. You actually own the bridge? The room got very quiet after that. Victoria answered before I could. Ownership boundaries are currently under administrative clarification. Administrative clarification. I almost laughed out loud. Another resident frowned toward the projector screen. Then why are construction trucks already using it? This time, even Victoria hesitated. Tiny hesitation. Barely noticeable unless you knew what to watch for. And suddenly I understood something important. The residents had not been told everything either. Then an older man near the back slowly raised his hand and asked the question nobody in that room seemed prepared for. If the bridge is private, who is liable if something happens to it? The room stayed quiet after that question in a way that felt heavier than yelling. You could hear the projector fan humming near the wall and ice shifting inside somebody's plastic Starbucks cup near the front row. Victoria kept her smile on, but it tightened around the edges now. Tiny cracks starting to show. Blackstone Ridge operates under full legal protection, she said carefully. Our attorneys are already coordinating with county officials regarding infrastructure compliance. That was not an answer. Everybody in the room knew it too. The older man who asked the question slowly folded his arms and leaned back in his chair without breaking eye contact with her. That still does not answer who is liable, he repeated. Victoria glanced toward me for half a second. Barely noticeable, but enough. She wanted me to answer because any answer I gave would pull me into the mess publicly. Smart move, honestly. Manipulative, but smart. I stayed quiet. Let her sit in it. Residents started shifting uncomfortably in their seats while rainwater dripped off jackets near the entrance. Somebody whispered something about lawsuits. Another resident quietly asked whether homeowners insurance even covered access road failures. Suddenly the room no longer felt like a polished HOA meeting. It felt like panic trying to stay polite. Victoria stepped away from the projector screen and clasped both hands together in front of her blazer. Everybody, please, she said smoothly. There is no reason to catastrophize. Catastrophize. Rich people love words like that. Makes expensive problems sound theoretical. I rubbed my thumb against the edge of the bridge permit folder sitting in my lap and realized half the people in the room were staring at it now instead of her. Funny how fast authority shifts once paperwork appears. Then a younger couple near the coffee station stood up. Probably early 30s. Young kids from the exhausted look in their faces. Wait, the husband asked carefully. Are you saying our only road in and out might not actually belong to the HOA? Nobody answered immediately. Victoria opened her mouth once, stopped, then smiled again. That fake controlled smile was working overtime now. The community has relied on the Western Crossing for years, she replied. Operational reliance and ownership are not always the same thing, I said quietly before I could stop myself. Heads turned toward me immediately. I honestly regretted speaking the second I did. Not because I was wrong, because suddenly everybody in the room looked scared in a very real way. Not angry, scared. And that changed the energy completely. A woman near the front frowned at Victoria. You told us county approval was finalized last month. Preliminary approvals, Victoria corrected instantly. The board acted in good faith based on infrastructure recommendations. There it was again. Legal phrasing. Careful distancing language. I had heard enough depositions during state projects to recognize self-protection when it started appearing mid-conversation. Then the clubhouse doors opened and cold mountain air rolled into the room along with Daniel Ruiz. County jacket. Damp hair. Coffee stain near one pocket like he had been wearing the same clothes since yesterday. The second Victoria saw him, her posture changed almost invisibly. Shoulders tighter. Chin slightly raised. Ruiz looked around the room like he regretted walking into it already. Morning, he muttered. Nobody answered. He spotted me near the back and gave the smallest nod possible before walking toward the projector screen. County requested temporary suspension of heavy commercial traffic over the western crossing effective immediately, he announced. The room exploded into overlapping voices after that. Not screaming. Worse. Nervous suburban panic. Questions everywhere at once. School routes. Deliveries. Emergency access. Property values. One older resident actually stood up demanding to know whether their homes were safe. Ruiz raised both hands awkwardly, trying to calm everybody down. Nobody said the bridge is unsafe, he clarified quickly. We are reviewing structural documentation discrepancies. Documentation discrepancies. Another careful phrase. Victoria stepped toward him immediately, heels clicking sharply across the hardwood floor. Daniel, she said in a low, controlled voice. This could have been handled privately. Ruiz looked exhausted. It stopped being private once commercial traffic started crossing a restricted structure without updated certification. The entire room went still again after that. Restricted structure. First time anybody had said it out loud publicly. I looked around and realized half the residents were now staring at Victoria the same way people look at airline employees after hearing the word mechanical issue. The meeting fell apart after that. Not dramatically. Honestly, that would have been easier. Real panic in wealthy neighborhoods sounds quieter than people expect. It sounds like forced calm cracking around the edges. Like somebody whispering into a phone near the hallway while pretending they're not scared. Like folding chairs scraping hardwood floors while residents suddenly remember they have errands to run. Victoria tried regaining control almost immediately. Everyone, please remain seated, she said sharply while adjusting the sleeves of her fuchsia blazer. But the room had shifted underneath her. You could feel it. Residents were no longer looking at her like a leader. They were looking at her like somebody who might have gotten them into trouble. Ruiz stayed near the projector screen, rubbing one hand over his forehead, like he already regretted every career decision that led him into county infrastructure work. This is a temporary review process, he clarified again. Nobody is shutting down access at this time. At this time. People caught that phrase immediately. I watched a younger mother near the back quietly open a school district app on her phone, while another resident started asking about emergency evacuation routes during winter storms. Nobody cared about landscaping rules anymore. Funny how fast priorities change once liability enters the room. I stayed seated through most of it, mostly because I suddenly felt exhausted in a way coffee could not fix. My grandfather used to say bridges reveal people eventually. Pressure exposes everything. Weak steel. Weak welds. Weak leadership. Sitting there listening to Blackstone Ridge unravel in slow motion, I finally understood what he meant. Victoria walked over toward me while residents crowded around Ruiz near the front. Up close I could smell expensive perfume mixed with stress, sweat hidden underneath. Human smell. Real. You are enjoying this far too much, she said quietly. I looked up at her. You think this is enjoyable? She crossed both arms tightly. You could help resolve this peacefully. By giving your HOA my bridge. By being reasonable. That word almost made me laugh again. Reasonable. People always use that word when asking somebody else to absorb the consequences for them. I leaned back in the folding chair slowly. Did you alter county infrastructure records? I asked. Her expression barely changed, but I noticed the pause before she answered. Blackstone Ridge submitted revised access proposals through legal channels. Not denial. Important difference. Without contacting me. The county was reviewing historical classifications. Same careful phrasing again. Every answer sounded pre-approved by attorneys now. Before I could respond, Ruiz suddenly called my name from across the room. Everybody turned toward us again. Mr. Walker, he said awkwardly. Can I speak with you outside for a minute? Victoria's jaw tightened immediately. Tiny movement. But real. Outside. Cold mist drifted across the parking lot, while runoff water trickled along the curb drains. The mountains had disappeared behind low gray clouds again. Ruiz shoved both hands into his county jacket and looked toward the bridge road before speaking. You still have the original inspection records? He asked quietly. Yeah. He nodded slowly like that confirmed something unpleasant. Good. Keep them safe. Why? Ruiz hesitated long enough to make me nervous all over again. Because this morning somebody requested expedited digital removal of archived permit references tied to the western crossing. I stared at him. Requested by who? He looked away toward the parking lot instead of answering directly. A white Range Rover sat near the entrance with rainwater still streaking the windows from the storm. I cannot prove anything yet, he muttered carefully. But this stopped looking like simple HOA overreach sometime last night. Wind moved through the pine trees above us, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and cold mountain air. Somewhere across the canyon, a truck engine started up near the bridge entrance. I frowned immediately. I thought heavy traffic was suspended. Ruiz looked tired again. It is supposed to be. We both turned toward the sound at the same time. Another concrete mixer was slowly heading toward the western crossing road despite everything that had just happened. Ruiz swore quietly under his breath. Then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number this time. I answered without thinking. A nervous male voice spoke immediately. Mr. Walker? My name is Tyler. I was one of the contractors last night. I recognized the younger guy from the bridge. You need to check the south support beam, he said quickly. Before they get there first. I left the clubhouse before Victoria could stop me. Honestly, I do not even think she tried. She stayed inside surrounded by nervous residents and legal questions while I drove down the canyon road with Tyler still breathing hard through my phone speaker. My windshield wipers dragged rainwater back and forth across cracked glass while gravel snapped under the truck tires. Slow down, I told him. What happened to the south beam? Silence crackled through the line for a second. Then Tyler lowered his voice. One of the mixers clipped it harder than they told you. My stomach tightened immediately. How hard? Hard enough the foreman stopped traffic for 10 minutes. The canyon suddenly felt colder around me, and nobody reported it. Tyler laughed nervously. Not because it was funny, because scared people laugh sometimes when they know they already made a terrible decision. They said the county paperwork would cover it. Of course they did. I drove faster after that. Fog clung low across the road, while runoff water spilled through the ditches from the storm. Every turn in the canyon felt too slow, too narrow. My grandfather used to say panic makes distance feel dishonest. He was right about that too. When I finally reached the bridge entrance, the concrete mixer Ruiz heard earlier was already parked near the crossing with hazard lights blinking through the mist. Another contractor truck sat nearby, empty, driver's door open. Tyler stood beside the railing in a soaked reflective jacket, rubbing both hands together nervously when I pulled up. He looked younger in daylight, maybe 23, 24. Exhausted eyes. You came, he muttered. Yeah, I said. Show me. The bridge looked different during the day. Worse somehow. Rainwater dripped steadily through the steel grating into the canyon below, while fresh mud and tire marks streaked the deck. I noticed new scratches along the guardrails too. Little signs of carelessness everywhere once I started looking closely. Tyler led me toward the southern support side underneath the crossing where maintenance access stairs dropped along the cliff wall. The entire structure smelled like wet rust and river water. My boots rang hollow against the steel steps while wind moved through the beams low enough to sound almost human. Halfway down, Tyler stopped talking completely. That scared me more than anything else. Then I saw the beam. My chest went tight instantly. The scrape from last night was not just surface damage. A section near the lower flange had actually warped inward slightly. Not catastrophic yet, but enough to matter, especially under repetitive heavy loads. I crouched beside the steel and ran my flashlight along the deformation while cold runoff dripped onto the back of my jacket collar. There were fresh fracture lines near one weld seam too. Tiny. Hairline. But real. Jesus, I whispered before I could stop myself. Tyler shifted uncomfortably behind me. The foreman said not to mention it. What foreman? Tyler hesitated. Blackstone's development contractor. Guy named Mercer. I recognized the name immediately. Mercer Development handled luxury mountain subdivisions all over central Colorado. Aggressive company. Expensive lawyers. The kind of people who treated environmental fines like parking tickets. I kept staring at the beam while my engineer brain ran numbers automatically again. Stress transfer, load distribution, failure progression, not immediate collapse. But the margin for error was disappearing faster than anybody on the HOA side realized. How many trucks crossed after the impact? I asked quietly. Tyler looked sick, answering. 6. I closed my eyes for a second after hearing that. Just 1 second. Long enough to feel the exhaustion catch up with me all at once. Because now I understood the real problem. If the bridge failed inspection publicly, Blackstone Ridge would lose its primary construction access route overnight. Property expansion stops. Contractor schedules implode. Investors panic. And suddenly Victoria's obsession with community access made perfect sense. This was never just about homeowners. It was money. Massive money. Wind pushed cold mist through the support beams while Tyler stared at me nervously. "So what happens now?" he asked. I looked back up toward the bridge deck overhead where another SUV crossed slowly above us, tires humming through stressed steel. Then I noticed something attached near the maintenance ladder I had somehow missed before. Fresh county inspection tags, dated 3 days earlier. My stomach dropped instantly, because somebody had already inspected this bridge before the trucks ever arrived.